With us today are Democratic candidate Elizabeth Furse and Republican candidate Tony Meeker. I'd like to start by outlining our format for today's debate. Our program will have several sections. First, each candidate will give a 5-minute opening statement. A coin toss held earlier this week determined the order of appearance for the debate. Following the opening statements, candidates will respond to questions from our City Club panel here in the front of the room. Our questioners today are members of the Program Committee, Bill Crane, Executive Director of the Portland Baroque Orchestra, and Andrew Wheeler, Architect and Planner. Andrew is also a member of the City Club Board of Governors. Questions were submitted in advance of the meeting in writing by members of the City Club of Portland. A special subcommittee from the City Club Program Committee has selected the questions. These are the only questions that will be asked today, and there will be no questions today from the floor. The candidates have not seen these questions in advance, and each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to the question. Our timer, also seated down front today, is Jolene Clausen, Neighborhood Coordinator for Neighbors North, Northwest, and also from our Program Committee. Following the panel questions, we will have 3 cross questions from the candidates. Following the cross-questioning, we will return to the City Club panel for a series of questions which will be followed by 3-minute closing statements from each candidate. This meeting is governed by the program format that I've just described and by the rules of conduct which are displayed on all of your tables, and we will adjourn at 1:15. We'll begin with opening statements, first from Elizabeth Furse, followed directly by that of Tony Meeker. So as our candidates approach their podiums, please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Furse and Tony Meeker to the City Club.
Looking for my glasses. This is the problem if you wear glasses and you didn't have them with you. Thank you. It's very good to be before the City Club again. Standing before you today are 2 people who represent 2 very different futures for Oregon, and those differences should become clear today. From the time I was a teenager in South Africa protesting apartheid, I have been deeply involved in public policy issues, and I have been an effective advocate for those issues. Fighting for new priorities, peace, justice, a sane economic policy is something I've done all my life, wherever I have been. In Oregon, I worked for 3 Oregon Indian tribes to pass federal legislation to restore their tribal status. I helped start the Oregon Peace Institute and a successful retail business to fund it. I organized the Citizens Train, a successful grassroots appeal for new budget priorities. And 2 years ago, City Club asked me to speak to you on economic conversion, how we transition from a Cold War military economy to one that focuses on our pressing needs here at home. And now I'm running for Congress to realize those new priorities I spoke of then. In the last 12 years, America has gone from being the largest creditor nation in the world to becoming the largest debtor nation in the world. Our economy is failing, our cities are disintegrating, our crime and infant mortality rates are rising. We are shipping jobs overseas instead of making the investments necessary to create jobs here at home. America should be the healthiest, the best educated, the most fully employed people in the world, but we're not. And I'm running for Congress because there's something wrong with our economy. There's something wrong when our children are not getting the education we need. When we are sending $120 billion a year to Europe to defend Europe while they invest in their own economies. There's something wrong when 450,000 Oregonians have no health care coverage, when children are going to school without immunization, and families are going broke trying to take care of their elders. But we can fix our national budget. We can change our economic priorities, and we can redefine national security. But we need leaders who understand that a nation must invest in itself to be strong. And we need leaders who don't just talk about change, but who have worked for change. We can no longer afford business as usual. To get our economy moving again, I propose that we cut the Pentagon budget by half in the next 5 years. We invest the $450 billion saving, half in deficit reduction, and half in new incentives, in ways that we can get our economy again moving, ways to produce new jobs. We have to invest in education, in health care, in housing, in transportation, in research and development for new technologies, new jobs. And all those investments will mean new jobs. All those new jobs will mean more people contributing to our economy. For too long, Oregon has lost money to the Pentagon, $2.4 billion every year. Just think if we got our share of the peace dividend, $1 billion for us to invest in Oregon. In Congress, I will fight for Oregon families. It's time to speak up for families, not military contractors. In Congress, I will fight for education, for the Oregon Graduate Institute, for Portland State. In Congress, I will fight for the environment. It's time we invested in cleaning up toxic wastes rather than wasting billions on new weapons. And in Congress, I will fight for a woman's right to choose. It is time to pass the Freedom of Choice Act, to keep government out of our bedrooms and our doctor's offices. In Congress, I will fight for change, for choice, for new budget priorities, and I need your vote to help me do it. Thank you.
Mr. Meeker, your opening statement, please.
From 1969 to 1987, the people of my district honored me with the privilege to serve in the Oregon House as a citizen legislator. During that time, I participated in initiatives started by the legislature, which in many cases led the nation. Yesterday was the 20th anniversary of the Oregon Bottle Bill. Oregon was the first state in the Union to pass such legislation, and I'm proud to have been one of the 5 legislators that wrote the original bill. In the late 70s, Representative Vera Katz and I co-sponsored the Juvenile Services Act, a product of an 18-month study that was started by Governor Straub that led to a county-administered juvenile services delivery program that stopped the flow of young people from our streets to Hillcrest and McLaren. In 1987, as a member of the Oregon Senate Labor Committee, I helped break the logjam on the Parental Leave Act, and Oregon became one of the first states in the nation to allow employees 6 weeks leave without losing their jobs in the case of a family emergency. In 1987, I became your state treasurer. The first order of business was to solve the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs deficit. We had a $600 million red ink in our $5 billion bond program. After developing a 14-point plan and 2.5 years of hard work, we not only solved the problem and increased the funding to a $250 million positive cash flow, but we brought our credit rating from a low A- to its current AA. This effort saved Oregon millions of dollars in additional interest on new debt. In 1988, I issued Oregon's first college savings bond program, federal and state tax-exempt bonds that allow parents and grandparents to save for their children and grandchildren's future education costs. Oregon was the second state in the union to have such a program. Last year, one of the challenges facing Oregon was on the foot of the passage of Measure 5. How does Oregon provide its share to fund light rail? There was not enough general fund dollars to do so. I proposed to the legislature a new system of funding for bonded debt that based on the first $10 million of lottery receipts received by the state. This bonding program provided the state share for light rail, and light rail is a reality. Again, the first state in the union to have such a program. 1 year ago, I decided to seek the vacant House seat here in Northwest Oregon. I did so because of my concern about the direction of the nation and the need for the United States Congress to be a part of the solution rather than the problem. We have runaway federal spending and a growing federal debt. We have a brewing crisis in health care where thousands of Americans can no longer afford our wonderful health care system. We have a stagnant economy where Americans are worried about their jobs and the future of their children's jobs. Now, I'm not so naive to believe that one person among 450 can solve these problems alone. But I do believe, because of your past support at the polls, that I have gained the experience and the education in state government that makes me well prepared to serve you. I also believe that as a small business person in Oregon for 25 years, and as a parent, and as a father, and as a husband, I understand the impact of government on everyday life. That's why I'm here today asking you for your support to represent you in Washington, D.C.
We'll now move to the portion of the program which consists of questions from our City Club panel. I'm going to turn the program over to the panelists, Bill Crane and Andrew Wheeler. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to the question asked, after which the other candidate will have 1 minute to rebut. The first question for Elizabeth Furse comes from Bill Crane.
Thank you, Patty. Ms. Furse, you have stated you support continued U.S. military aid to Israel. Doesn't this contradict your past stands as a peace advocate and the founder of the Oregon Peace Institute? If not, why not?
As long as Israel is under attack and not allowed to prosper as it's, in other words, other countries are saying that it should not be allowed to exist, I believe that they will need to have a strong defense. However, I think that our goal in the Middle East should be how do we move toward a settlement of the problems in the Middle East, and we don't do that, obviously, by arming the Middle East. We, and I believe we can, have a peace process right now going on, which the government of Israel is strongly in favor in, and so are the other countries in the Middle East. It is that peace process that I believe will settle the situation in the Middle East, and no longer will there be a need for the enormous amount of arms in that region.
Your rebuttal? All right. We'll move on to the next question then from Andrew Wheeler for Mr. Meeker.
Thank you, Patty. Mr. Meeker, please give a complete explanation of your position on the abortion issue, specifying under what conditions, if any, an abortion should be legal, and if you think it is appropriate for abortions to be funded by tax dollars. Do you support the Bush administration's gag rule?
I support abortion in the cases of rape, incest, and the life of the mother, and otherwise I do not. I do not support abortion for the sex selection of a child. I do not support funding of abortion. I believe that most Americans believe that abortions in the third trimester should be regulated.
Your rebuttal?
Choice has been the law of the land for the last 20 years. I support the right of a woman to make a choice in this difficult decision. And the answer Mr. Meeker gave is that he is opposed to choice in the case of abortion.
Question for Elizabeth Furse from Bill Crane.
Ms. Furse, what do you think should happen to the Oregon Plan health care proposal, which was recently shot down by the Bush administration?
Well, I think the Oregon plan is a very positive step, but it is, of course, an attempt to fill a gap that exists nationwide. I think what we must do is put together a national health care plan that allows access, choice in a physician, contains costs, and is available to all American citizens. I applaud the Oregon legislature for having come up with a plan to meet Oregon's health care needs. But I think what we must move towards is a national health care plan so that Oregonians and Mississippians and Arkansans are also able to have access to good health care.
Your rebuttal?
I think we should slap the president's hand for not supporting the federal waiver for Oregon. The Oregon Health Care Plan is literally a leading-edge solution to America's health care problems. It offers and extends health care to the 450,000 Oregonians that don't have it. It begins the process of capping costs. Now, there are a few additional things we need to do at the national level, but once again, like in the bottle bill, like in cleaning our Willamette rivers, Oregon has led the way and shown us how to solve health care nationwide.
Question from Andrew Wheeler for Tony Meeker.
Mr. Meeker, as a fresh member of Congress, you'll initially have very limited ability beyond your single vote to impact decisions of the Congress. If elected, how do you plan to build the influence your district in Congress?
This question would apply to both Elizabeth and myself because whoever you elect is a freshman. I would simply look to the past. As a freshman member of the Oregon House of Representatives in the state of Oregon, myself and four other legislators started the Oregon bottle bill. It did take us 4 years, but we got the job done. Through my experience as a legislator, through my experience in the Oregon State Senate, and as state treasurer, I know how to build coalitions, and I will hit the ground running in 1993.
I was very fortunate between 1980 and 1986 to be able to work in Congress on 3 pieces of legislation, national legislation. I know that one person can make a difference in Congress if you're hardworking and you don't say no for take no for an answer. I also should say that as a member of the majority party in Congress, I would be able to have more access to committee assignments and also would be able to work closely with the rest of our delegation from Oregon. So I think I could be a very effective legislator. And remember, there will be 120 new members of Congress this year. Let's not just send new faces. Let's send new priorities.
Question from Bill Crane for Elizabeth Furse.
Ms. Furse, why do you favor term limitations for members of Congress?
I favor term limitations because I believe that there has been a lock on new people getting into Congress. For instance, I think that the people who wrote our Constitution thought of it as a citizen Congress. And yet, for many years, it's been very hard for people to move into new places. In 1990, 98% of incumbents who sought re-election were re-elected. But I think going along with term limitations, you have to go along with campaign reform. You cannot have one without the other. And so I am very in favor of campaign reform, and I am very saddened that the President vetoed the campaign reform bill.
I very strongly support term limitations. You, as voters this fall, in 32 days, will vote on one for Oregon. I strongly support that, and when you send me to Congress in 1993, I will be a co-sponsor of a U.S. constitutional amendment for term limits so that it applies nationwide to all members of Congress and the United States Senate.
Question for Mr. Meeker by Andrew Wheeler.
Since, Mr. Meeker, since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain countries, Americans have assumed a cut in military spending would occur. If elected, what percentage cut in the military budget would you advocate for?
I support a, excuse me, I thought you were finished. What was the balance of your question?
And what elements would you cut?
And what would I cut? I strongly support a 40% reduction in the federal defense budget and have drafted a very comprehensive paper back in January and February of this year that outlines specifically, detail by detail, those cuts that should be made. They are primarily reductions in the B-2 bomber, the F-116s, and others. The one caution that we must make in the reduction of the defense budget is this. If we go beyond the cuts that the Congress has already agreed to, which is about an 8% per year cut, we have the threat of sending into our workplace millions of men and women who are currently in uniform. That caution requires us to do some retraining. It causes us to invest in the ability for those people to seek employment and to not cost disintermediation in the economy.
I would support a 50% reduction in the Pentagon budget. Places I would take it from is first the $120 billion we are spending in Europe while they invest in their own economies, Star Wars, and along with the cut in military funding, you have to have, and I would be a co-sponsor of, the Economic Conversion and Adjustment Act. So we transition our economy smoothly between a militarized economy to a civilian one.
Thank you. That concludes our questions from the panel. Now, during this portion of the program, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask 3 questions of her or his opponent. The question must be asked in 30 seconds. The opponent will have 1 minute to respond, after which the questioner will have 30 seconds to rebut. The role of questioner will alternate between the candidates. We'll begin with Elizabeth Furse. Your first question, please.
Mr. Meeker, one of the first acts that will appear on your desk if you were to be elected to Congress will be the Freedom of Choice Act. If you were in Congress today, would you vote yes or no on the Freedom of Choice Act?
I have described my position on the issue of abortion. My answer is that I would vote no.
I would say in rebuttal that there are some places where the government does not belong to be, in our bedrooms and in our doctor's offices. The choice on an abortion is a private and very difficult decision for a woman. I am a guaranteed vote for the Freedom of Choice Act, and I will be a vote to override any possible veto.
On September the 16th, the Scappoose Spotlight coach used you to say that you support the Portland General Corporation plan for a 4-year phase-down closure of Trojan, and in the same paragraph that you support Measure 6, which closes Trojan immediately. You can't have it both ways, Elizabeth. Explain your 2 positions.
Well, I will vote to close Trojan. I have opposed nuclear power for a long time because I believe it is neither economic nor safe. However, I am glad that PG has decided to close Trojan. I think the issue before a member of Congress is how do we transition that economy? How do we find alternative energy? How do we put Oregon in the forefront of being the state which develops the kind of alternative energy that we will need as Trojan is closed?
The only comment here is that the 4-year phase down is just plain common sense. It doesn't immediately eliminate 1,200 jobs. It provides a continued tax base in Columbia County, which is 52% of the local economy, and at the same time it allows for an easy transition to supplant the lost energy for our state.
Your question for Mr. Meeker.
Mr. Meeker, when the real estate scandal in your office broke, you were quoted as saying, "I found it, I investigated it, and I fixed it," end quote. But testimony before the Senate committee says that you didn't find it, the Oregon Real Estate Agency found it, you didn't investigate it for 6 weeks, and you didn't fix it because your office continued making deals with the people involved in the scandal. Can you explain your actions?
I guess you were at a different hearing than the one I heard. It was my request that created the Attorney General's investigation of the activities of personnel in the Oregon Treasury. As soon as the information was available for me to make action, as advised by the Attorney General, the employee was suspended. And on the same day, I called for a 14-point plan that brought in an outside audit team that audited the entire commercial loan portfolio, and we have adopted each and all of their recommendations. The program is under control.
I would remind you that you ignored audits at your office, and now your office is under investigation by the United States Attorney, the Oregon Attorney General, the Internal Revenue Service, the Oregon Real Estate Agency, and a special committee appointed by Senate President John Kitzhaber. These investigations are costing Oregon taxpayers thousands of dollars to get to the truth, and I believe that you owe Oregonians a full accounting.
Your question for Ms. Furse.
On September the 27th, the Oregonian reported you to say that Oregonians will never hear you justify any military spending on the basis that it generates or protects jobs. Earlier this year, and I understand as of today, you have an Israeli paper that supports loan guarantees to Israel because Israel buys military goods from America, which helps create jobs here. You can't have it both ways, Elizabeth. Explain your two positions.
I will never justify a military system because it generates jobs. I don't believe that defense is a jobs program. My position on the security of Israel is that Israel is under strong attack and therefore requires a strong defense.
We'll move then to a question for Mr. Meeker.
Mr. Meeker, in light of campaign contributions you received from the National Rifle Association, would you tell us where you stand on two gun control measures supported by most law enforcement communities to save the lives of officers and to make our streets safer? First, the Brady Bill, requiring a 5-day waiting period for handgun sales. And second, a ban on the manufacture and sale of military-style assault weapons.
I support the Oregon law on this issue, which does have a waiting period for the purchase of handguns. And additionally, fully automatic weapons are very strictly, tightly controlled in the country. I don't support the elimination of the constitutional protection to keep and bear arms. Unfortunately, we as a nation continue to focus on the wrong thing. It's the community that breeds crime, the lack of jobs that breed crime, that we must focus on, and not the incidental use of a handgun.
The latest FBI report says that 3 out of 4 juveniles who commit murder commit them with handguns. When I'm in Congress, I will stand with our enforcement officers to support the safety of our streets, and I will stand up to the gun lobby who want us to live in a more unsafe world.
We'll wrap up our cross-questioning with a question by Mr. Meeker of Ms. Furse.
The Oregon Department of Economic Development, in an analysis released on September the 14th on the United States-Canada-Mexico North American Free Trade Agreement, has reported that the agreement will produce 3,500 net new jobs for Oregon in 5 years. On Wednesday, you held a press conference that denounced the agreement. How do you justify your position in the area of jobs for Oregon in opposing the North American Free Trade Agreement?
I strongly in support of free and fair trade. However, there is a number of reports on what the effect of this particular agreement will do to jobs. 400,000 jobs lost. 1 to 3% of our agricultural products we will lose in sales for Oregon. There is a report which shows that 70% of jobs, high-wage jobs, will be depressed, some to as much as $1,000 per year. Now, I believe that we can have a free trade agreement. I believe we need such a thing. But I want to be in Congress working on the environmental concerns and protecting our workers and our citizens here. 17 pesticides in Mexico have been banned in the United States. We cannot risk the health and safety of our own citizens because of this agreement. We must have environmental concerns addressed.
Already in the last several years, our exports to Mexico have created 2,700 new jobs. We have a total of 17,100 jobs that are in support of trade to both Mexico and Canada. Opening the door for further trade will expand our job horizon by the 3,500 that have already been labeled. Oregon labor organizations will tell you, as they have the Department of Economic Development, there will be no lost jobs through NAFTA for Oregon labor.
Okay, we now... Thank you. We now return to our City Club panelists for the final questioning in the debate. As before, the candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question, and the opponent will have 1 minute to rebut. We will begin with Bill Crane's question for Tony Meeker.
Thank you, Patty. Mr. Meeker, a significant number of large American industries are locating their manufacturing plants in third world countries to take advantage of less stringent environmental controls and lower wages. And of course, our president is quietly pursuing the GATT and NAFTA treaties. Is this good for America in the long run? And if you think not, what would you do to discourage this practice?
It obviously isn't good for America to lose jobs because of other nations' lesser environmental standards. There are two factors that need to be considered. First, since 1985, the United States Congress has passed 17 laws. Those 17 laws have literally added 188,000 bureaucrats that do nothing but write rules and regulations. It's time for a timeout on added regulations to American business so that we get things under control. Secondly, by negotiating free trade agreements with our trading partners, we can demand that they bring their environmental standards closer to ours.
I believe that we need to invest part of the peace dividend in new factories, in infrastructure so that businesses can move goods and services. We don't do that. We're investing instead in the defense of Europe. We should be investing in our own country. I think we should also be looking at incentives to business to help them reinvest, to help them get their businesses back on a strong and healthy footing. And I think that once again, new priorities will get us the kind of investment, the kind of economy that America needs today.
We'll have a question for Ms. Furse from Andrew Wheeler.
Ms. Furse, over the past 12 years, the federal government has delegated more responsibilities than ever to the states without money to support them. We see the results every day. Poor people, especially children, are not getting services, and some are being forced to live on the streets. State governments are running out of money. In many states, citizens are supporting anti-tax measures to protect the unfair burden at the state and local level. What would you do as a member of Congress to relieve state governments of burdens placed on them by new federalism?
You know, 10 years ago, the federal revenue sharing was $55.5 billion. It has gone to $15.5 billion, less federal dollars to the state. Congress is constantly passing legislation that puts new burdens on it's good legislation, but it requires new burdens. We must support those burdens. Businesses and states must get that kind of money. 70% of our affordable housing dollars were cut in a period between 1980 and 1992. 70%. We've got to restore those cuts so that affordable housing is available to our people. 1 in 7 children in Oregon, eligible children, cannot get Head Start. We have got to fully fund Head Start. So the federal government, the states, the counties, and the cities become a partnership where we work together. We can't spend our money on the military and not have safety in our own communities.
We are adding to our federal debt $1.1 billion per day. Every day that goes by, we are spending more money than we have already created in a $3 trillion debt. Simply saying that we're going to pass new mandates on state government and then fund them will simply put us deeper in debt. The other option is to not pass the mandate if you don't have the money. We must get our spending under control because our grandchildren and our children will not be able to pay off a $3 trillion obligation without some controls on our fiscal future.
Question from Bill Crane for Tony Meeker.
Mr. Meeker, the record shows that you have stated that you oppose ballot measure 9, the ballot measure addressing the civil rights of homosexuals in Oregon, but you are not actively campaigning against it. Is not actively opposing the measure the same as tacit approval?
I don't know how much clearer you can say it. Along with you, when you walk into the polling booth on November the 3rd, just 32 days from now, I'm going to vote no. It's the right of the people of this state to vote and express their opinions. I've expressed mine. I'm voting no.
A Lutheran minister who spent a long time in a Nazi prisoner of war camp or concentration camp said this: "When they came for the gypsies, I was not a gypsy, and so I said nothing. When they came for the homosexuals, I was not a homosexual, and I said nothing. When they came for the Jews, I was not a Jew, and I said nothing." And on, when they came from the Catholics, when they came for the Protestants, he said, and when they came for me, there was no one left to speak. We must speak out against ballot measure 9. We must always speak out whenever civil rights are under attack.
Question from Andrew Wheeler for Elizabeth Furse.
Ms. Furse, one of you has spent 20 years in the state legislature as a treasurer. The other has minimal governmental experience. How important is lengthy governmental experience, in your view, to effective representation of the 1st District in Congress?
I believe that I have all the experience needed to be a good member of Congress. I have been a parent. I understand what it's like to be a parent. I have worked on change. I have seen problems in my community, and I have started organizations to solve those problems. I am a farmer. I understand what it's like to be patient. I know that one person can make a difference, and more than any other year, in 1992, one person is going to join with 120 other new priorities, new people taking new priorities. And I have the experience, I have the will, I have the energy, and I'm a very good advocate.
One of the disadvantages of having served for many years is that you have a record. I'm standing here telling you that by examining my record, you know who I am and what I can do. In my opening remarks, I listed for you initiatives that I tackled, new ideas that I brought to Oregon, working in both the majority and the minority. tackling the problems of the Oregon Treasury with high debt problems, poor credit ratings, and beating them all. So what you get here is not only experience, but a tested commodity. My opponent has no record to examine.
Question from Bill Crane for Tony Meeker.
Mr. Meeker, if you were in a position to advise now any, the question originally said either, any of the current candidates for U.S. President, what would you tell him is the most important change he should promise the American people?
The most important change is to stop runaway spending. In this year alone, we will add $350 billion to the federal debt. In 1970, the national debt represented 28% of personal savings. In 1990, it represented 140% of personal savings. It diminishes our ability to deal with problems. The single largest line on the federal budget is interest. If we weren't paying out huge sums of interest, we could address health care, housing, and the other needs that this nation desperately must face. This president, no matter whom, must have the support of the United States Congress, and I'm one of them, that will develop a 10-year strategy to get rid of the national debt.
I would tell him, cut wasteful spending, bring it home to our shores, invest in our people, invest in our businesses, invest in our education. Put our people back to work, because that's what America does best. America does wonderful work, and that's what our people want. Put us back to work.
Question for Elizabeth Furse from Andrew Wheeler.
Ms. Furse, the timber industry doesn't play as big a role in your district's economy as it once did, but what about the future? In your view, will timber continue to decline, hold its own, or increase in the future economy?
I think the timber will always be an important industry for Oregon. But I'm a little fed up with the sort of solution that we can either have jobs or the environment, because I think we can find solutions where we can have jobs and the environment. One of the things I think that I understand is that we need to support legislation that will resolve the problem. First of all, we need a predictable, sustainable yield from our forests. Secondly, we need scientifically defensible set-asides of old growth. Third, we need transition for our communities that have been so affected. Fourth, we need research, better management. How do we better manage the forests we have? And fifth, I believe that we need to stop the export of raw logs and keep the jobs here in Oregon.
Question from Bill Crane for Tony Meeker. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you may respond.
The wood products industry should be, always should be, one of the leading industries in this state. We currently have absolute gridlock. The Endangered Species Act, the way it is crafted, allows groups of citizens to file lawsuits on recovery plans. The Bureau of Land Management recovery plan is in court. The Federal Forest Service recovery plan is in the federal court, and nothing is happening. The First District, you bet it impacts the First District. The Klatskanai School District, a third of their teachers laid off to the 1st of July this year. Why? Because they depend on in lieu of fees, and ballot measure 5 doesn't solve the problem for them. We must act. Every one of the things that Elizabeth first talked about as solutions are solutions, and yet the one bill that wraps them up, the Family and Forest Protection Act, she calls absurd. It is time to pass it and to take care of Oregon's forest resources for the future.
Thank you. Now we'll have a question from Bill Crane.
Mr. Meeker, Each of you has been quite critical of your opponent thus far in the campaign. So in City Club tradition, in the spirit of rising above negative campaigning, could you please tell the City Club what you see as the one quality which best qualifies your opponent for this job?
This question was asked of both of us one time earlier on Channel 2, and I will give the same answer that I did there. I admire Elizabeth's work with migrants. I think that her efforts there are applaudable. I am also going to tell you that I'm proud of my work with migrants and Indians. In fact, we received an award from the Migrant Indian Coalition for helping migrants in their problems with daycare and work camps in my time as a state senator.
I admire Mr. Meeker's willingness to serve for almost a quarter of a century in Oregon. I think that that has shown that he has patience and that he is interested in the public good.
We'll have a question from Andrew Wheeler for Elizabeth Furse.
Ms. Furse, both of you have rural agricultural roots in the district. Meeker has a seed business, Furse has a farm. Do you feel in touch with the needs, problems, and issues facing a major city, Portland?
I think it's important to have both those roots. I have worked for many years downtown Portland, where we located the Oregon Peace Institute. We didn't want to put it in an ivory tower. We wanted it right in the center of downtown Portland. And that is where the Oregon Peace Institute is located. And that is where it is very obvious the problems, but also the solutions that Portland has brought to the urban concern. Now, of course, we have to be concerned about our land, too. We need farmland. We must preserve the wonderful things of Oregon. So I think that I will be able to provide some balance because I both operate in the city and also live in the country, and I love the country.
The answer is obviously yes. The metropolitan area of this state is the not only the economic engine, but also the deliverer of our rural goods to the rest of the world. And I think I've demonstrated not only an understanding of that, but have worked hard to build that relationship. Light rail is a reality because of a funding package that I put together, resisted by downstate legislators. They didn't want to take $10 million out of the general fund to make light rail happen. So I put together a package that received broad bipartisan support, understanding the need of light rail to this community, understanding the need of the Port of Portland to deliver the goods for the entire state. I have a long record of understanding this relationship.
We have time for one final question for each candidate, and that will first be from Bill Crane for Tony Meeker.
Thank you, Patty. Mr. Meeker, Portland and Washington County are facing tougher federal clean water standards, which will cost area ratepayers $1 billion or more over about the next 20 years. In your view, should clean water standards be relaxed to lessen the impact on ratepayers, or should the federal government step in to help pay for these projects, as it indeed once did?
Part of the way to solve this problem is to reverse a decision that was made in 1986 by causing a limit on tax-exempt bonds. We must allow states to have the authority to issue tax-exempt bonds for a variety of projects, including sewer and water connections. That strategy reduces the interest cost to the taxpayer and spreads the cost out over a long-term arena. It's very important that we allow that kind of program to pay for clean water standards.
I think that's just another example of federal mandates, good mandates, things that we all want nationwide, where the Congress has not picked up its obligation to assist communities. And I think that is what a member of Congress needs to be doing, is making sure that Congress picks up its obligation when it passes a mandate.
Final question for Elizabeth Furse from Andrew Wheeler.
Ms. Furse, increasingly, our citizens are distrustful and alienated from the governments created to serve them. Some say there is a crisis of confidence. How will you help government re-engage the public and restore a level of trust?
There are many ways that we can restore trust. One of them is we must stay in communication with people. We cannot have members of Congress disappearing into the Beltway, never to be seen again until 2 years later. What we must do is we must set up, and which am going to be working on as a member of Congress, how do we set up the communication system, cable access to constituents? How are we available to our constituents? But more than that, are we going to be persuaded by those who give us money to vote in a certain way? And I believe that it is so important to send people who go with integrity, who are there for the public trust, who have done that in the past, who have understood that there are some causes bigger than the job. And I hope that I can take that integrity, that history.
Obviously, this is one of the major problems that facing the nation, congressional reform, and it takes a variety of shapes. I think the first stroke is to pass term limits. The second is to reform the method that legislation goes through Congress. I think one of the biggest failures of the Congress is to send a budget bill through 4 different committees, each committee adding their own flavor and their own input to the bill. That's one of the frustrations that Americans see. There are existing problems, there are potential solutions, and nothing happens. So the congressional reform, term limits, are part of the way we address that problem.
That concludes our questioning. We'll now move to the final portion of the program, 3-minute closing statements from each candidate. We'll begin with Elizabeth Furse.
Thank you again for hosting this debate. You have heard both the candidates. Voters in Oregon's 1st District have a clear choice. On the critical issues and on the record, my opponent and I are worlds apart. One of us will work for change in Washington, D.C. The other will be part of the system. When you look at my opponent's record, what you see is not the kind of leadership we need for Oregon right now. Yes, it's true, he worked on the bottle bill, but that was 20 years ago. What he doesn't tell you is he voted against many of the laws and protections that make Oregon unique. He voted no on the pioneering land use bill, no on our Clean Drinking Water Act, no on our law to inform workers about toxic hazards in the workplace. He voted no for veterans' benefits for veterans and their families who suffered injury from exposure to Agent Orange. Those laws, passed with strong bipartisan support, are today part of Oregon's quality of life. To many, when he had a chance to make progress and solve problems, he said no. Our contrasting records will tell you a lot about where we stand in Congress. On the critical issues, you know where I'll stand. My opponent is supported by the Oregon Citizens Alliance, the Right to Life groups, and the National Rifle Association, so you know where he stands. I will fight to keep the government out of our bedrooms and our doctor's offices. I will take on the National Rifle Association when the safety of our cities is at stake. And when tolerance and basic human rights are at stake, I will not hesitate to take on the Oregon Citizens Alliance. Those are the stakes, 2 very different candidates, world apart, on the issues, on our records, and on our vision. If you like the way this country has been going for the last 12 years, so be it. But if you think we need real change, new priorities, then I ask that you support me with your vote. I have worked hard for change, and I won't take no for an answer. I will go to Congress not to get a job, but to do a job. And when I've done that job, I'll know it, I'll be satisfied, and I'll come home to my Washington County farm. Thank you.
In my opening remarks, I told you about the challenges that I have accepted as a legislator and as your state treasurer. The bottle bill, the Juvenile Services Commission, the Parental Leave Act, the Veterans Home Loan Program that was $600 million in the hole, college savings bonds for Oregon's children, and light rail funding. I also expressed to you my concerns about the direction of this nation. We have runaway federal spending. We have problems with our magnificent health care system. And we have a stagnant, faltering economy. I support a 10-year strategy on reducing the federal debt, a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution, a line item veto for the president, and it matters not who the president is. 40% spending reductions in defense, capping pork barrel spending, addressing fraud and abuse in Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps. I support the Oregon Health Care Plan, which was hammered out by Oregon's legislature over the last 4 years, which extends health care coverage to 450,000 Oregonians that don't now have it. It literally can be a blueprint to the solution for America's system. And we can do it without raising taxes or without damaging high-quality care that this nation so enviably has. I also support economic initiatives to make America a place where business opportunities occur once again. In this global economy, we must be competitive. I support the $5,000 first-time homebuyer tax incentive. I support permanent investment tax credits for new equipment and research and development. And I also support the expansion of free and fair trade so we can be competitive in this environment. In the past, you've honored me. You have honored me by allowing me to serve you both as a legislator and as your treasurer. I believe that I've met those tests. I've offered initiative, and I've helped solve problems. Now, I'm asking you for your support to address the challenges that this nation faces. Together, we can make a difference.
Regardless of your political leanings, we hope that today's debate has given you a better understanding of the positions of the various candidates. And in closing, please join me with a round of applause for both candidates, and thank you for coming today.